Her large hands, which she had hidden for so long, now held her father's watch, motionless like time since that loss. The rain hit the roof of the empty ranch while her eyes searched for answers in the void. Then he arrived, with his cane and his blind eyes that paradoxically saw what no one else did, her true worth. In the shared silence between the whisper of the dry earth and the touch of their fingers, Clara May discovered that strength is not in hiding who you are, but in daring to show it. If this story touches your heart, that place where we keep our own losses and hopes, give us a like, as one who lights a small light in the darkness, and tell us, how do you imagine Clara and her blind cowboy's journey will end? Your life experience makes your version unique and valuable to all of us. The dry wind of Dry Creek raised dust in the evening, carrying with it the contained sighs of Clara May Dawson. From the window of the cantina where she served, she observed the horizon like someone looking for an answer in the line where earth and sky merge. Her hands, large and strong, capable of bending horseshoes according to the bad tongues of the town, held a glass with contradictory delicacy. Clara felt the weight of the gazes on her back. It had always been that way. With her almost 2 meters in height and a constitution that defied what the town considered proper for a woman, she had become accustomed to being the target of whispers and stifled laughter. The mirror behind the bar returned a fragmented image: broad shoulders, angular face softened by eyes that reflected a deep melancholy, like wells where never-confessed dreams drowned. "Clara, serve another round to the gentleman," ordered Meredith, the owner of the cantina, a small woman but with an iron character who had taken her in when no one else did. The jingling of spurs announced the entrance of more customers. Clara turned, balancing the tray with glasses, when she perceived a change in the atmosphere of the place. The door opened and the usual murmur transformed into silence. A man of medium height entered with measured but confident steps, guided by a polished wooden staff. What most caught Clara's attention was not the fact that it was evident he could not see, but the way he moved, with a confidence that she, with all her intact vision, had never felt. The stranger wore a hat worn by the sun and time, and an indigo scarf tied around his neck, contrasting with the earthy tone of his travel clothes. "Good afternoon," the man greeted, with a voice that seemed to caress the words. "Would someone be so kind as to tell me where I can find Miss Clara May Dawson?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. No one ever came asking for her. Never. The silence became denser, as if the dust from outside had entered and suspended time in the cantina. "That's me," she responded, and her voice sounded strange even to herself, as if it had awakened something dormant. The man turned his face toward her with disconcerting precision and smiled slightly. He had eyes of such a clear blue that they seemed almost translucent, and small wrinkles at the corners revealed a life in the open air. "My name is James McGraw, although some call me Lantern," he introduced himself, slightly inclining his head. "I have traveled a long way to speak with you, Miss Dawson." Clara felt something stirring inside her, like the leaves of the poplars that flanked the dry creek on the outskirts of town. A premonition, perhaps. Or maybe, although she didn't know it then, the first breath of a wind of change that would soon become a storm. The Double Horseshoe Ranch stood solitary among yellowish hills, more like a reminder than a home. Clara walked on the worn porch, listening to the creaking of the wood under her feet, while the echo of that strange visitor's words reverberated in her mind. James McGraw had requested a private conversation with her, away from the curious ears of Dry Creek. And although prudence advised her to distrust, something about that blind man awakened in her a curiosity she thought had died long ago. The ranch, once prosperous, now showed the scars of abandonment. Since the mysterious disappearance of her father, Harlan Dawson, 4 years ago, Clara had managed to keep it afloat barely, working in the cantina and selling small parcels to subsist. Reverend Silas Crow, administrator of the local bank and self-proclaimed moral guardian of the town, had offered to buy it whole on multiple occasions, always with that smile that never reached his eyes. "Your father would have wanted you to have a life more appropriate for a woman," he had told her on his last visit, with that voice that pretended to be paternal, but that gave Clara chills. "This ranch is too much responsibility for someone like you." Clara caressed the wooden post of the porch where her father had carved marks to measure her growth. The last one, at 16 years old, already surpassed the height of any man in the county. "My little oak," he called her, without a hint of mockery, with a pride that no one else had ever shown for her height. From her skirt pocket, she took out the only personal object left of her father. A small silver pocket watch with the initials HD engraved. The lid was dented on one side, as if it had received a blow. The inner mechanism had long since stopped working, freezing time at 3:27, but Clara kept it as a talisman, a reminder that there was a time when someone looked at her and saw something more than a curiosity. The sound of hooves approaching pulled her from her reflections. In the distance, she distinguished the figure of James McGraw mounted on a bay horse. What surprised her was not his presence, but the way he rode, erect, confident, as if he could see every stone in the path. Next to him, two more riders approached. Clara narrowed her eyes, trying to identify them, and felt her heart stop for an instant. Could it be? No, it was impossible. Ezekiel Harper and Cole Bennett had disappeared the same day as her father. Everyone in Dry Creek assumed they had died together, perhaps in some accident in the mountains or victims of bandits. But there they were, or at least two men who looked extraordinarily like them, riding toward the Double Horseshoe Ranch like specters from the past. Clara descended the porch steps, drawing herself up to her full height. Whoever this James McGraw was, and whatever his purpose in bringing these men, she would face what came with the same silent strength that had kept her standing all these years. The wind changed direction, bringing with it the smell of wet earth, although it hadn't rained in weeks. A presage, thought Clara. The sky was clear, but she could feel the storm approaching. The kitchen of the Double Horseshoe Ranch, with its solid oak table and its walls impregnated with the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread of yesteryear, now hosted a meeting that Clara would never have imagined. James McGraw, seated with his hands extended on the worn wood, seemed to perceive the space with an acuity that defied his blindness. At his side, Ezekiel "Zeke" Harper, with a greyer beard but the same vivacious eyes that Clara remembered, and Cole Bennett, whose weathered face showed a new scar that crossed his left cheek. The silence between them weighed like humidity before a storm. Clara served coffee in mismatched cups, her movements deliberately slow, giving herself time to assimilate the presence of those men she believed lost forever. "You've become a strong woman, Clara May," Zeke finally said, with the hoarse voice of one not accustomed to speaking. "Your father would be proud." Clara placed the coffee pot in the center of the table with more force than necessary. "My father is dead, just as you were until an hour ago," she responded, unable to contain the tremor in her voice. "Where have you been all these years? Why do you return now?" James McGraw, who until then had remained silent, turned his face toward her with disconcerting precision, and his clear eyes, though unable to see, seemed to penetrate beyond her facade of toughness. "Your father saved my life once, Miss Dawson," he explained in a serene voice, "during a blizzard in the mountains when my horse bolted and I lost my way. He found me half frozen and took me to his camp. He told me that everyone deserves a second chance when life tests us." Clara sat down slowly, her large hands clutching the cup like an anchor. "My father always had a weakness for lost causes," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. "Not so lost," Cole intervened, leaning forward. "Your father sent us away, Clara. He made us promise not to return until it was safe." "Safe?" The word sounded strange, foreign. "What are you talking about?" James extracted a yellowed envelope from his vest and slid it across the table to her. "Your father wrote this letter to you. He entrusted it to me 4 years ago, when our paths crossed for the second time. He made me swear that I would deliver it to you personally if something happened to him." Clara looked at the envelope as if it contained hot embers. Her name was written in her father's unmistakable handwriting, firm strokes that spoke of a man accustomed to branding cattle and signing contracts with the same determination. With fingers that suddenly seemed clumsy, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. As she read, the world around her seemed to blur, as if the past and present were colliding, rewriting everything she thought she knew. "My dear Clara, my little oak. If you are reading this, it means that my suspicions were correct and I have not been able to protect you as I should. Forgive. "Sammy for that. There are things about the double horseshoe that I never told you. This ranch hides more than cattle and memories. Under the spring hill, in the cave where you used to hide as a child, you will find a chest with documents. They are evidence of what really happened with the lands that Silas Crow now claims as his own. Trust the man who delivers this letter to you. And remember that even the strongest trees need to bend sometimes so as not to break with the wind." With "All my love do," Clara looked up, feeling that something fundamental had changed within her. It was no longer just pain that she felt, but a spark of something she had not experienced for a long time. Hope. "Do you know what happened to my father?" she asked, with a voice that no longer tried to hide her vulnerability. The three men exchanged glances, or at least James seemed to perceive the silent exchange between Zeke and Cole, because he nodded slightly. "We don't have all the answers, Miss Dawson," James responded, extending a hand across the table as if offering a point of support. "But we are here to help you find them." Clara observed that outstretched hand, calloused and marked by hard work, so similar to her own. For years she had carried the weight of her loneliness, convinced that her size and her strength were a barrier between her and the world. Now, paradoxically, a man who could not see her seemed to be the first to really look at her. With a decision that surprised even herself, Clara extended her hand and took James's. His touch was warm, firm, without hesitation at the contact with her large, rough fingers. Outside, the first drops of unexpected rain began to drum on the roof, as if the sky finally fulfilled the promise that the wind had whispered hours before. The cave under the spring hill remained as Clara remembered it from her childhood, a secret refuge where the rocks formed strange figures that her imagination transformed into characters from never-written tales. The light from the oil lamp projected dancing shadows on the walls, while the echo of her steps mixed with the constant drip of water filtered from the surface. James waited outside, insisting that this moment belonged only to her. "There are revelations that require solitude," he had said with that voice that seemed to understand more than it expressed. Zeke and Cole had ridden toward the town to observe Silas Crow's movements without raising suspicions. Clara entered the deepest part of the cave, where as a child she had built a small altar with colored stones and found feathers. Under a flat rock that served as a natural table, exactly where her father had described, she found a rusted metal chest. It had no lock, just a simple mechanism that yielded under the pressure of her fingers. Inside, in addition to the documents mentioned in the letter, there was something that made her heart contract. A pair of leather gloves, too large for an ordinary man, made to measure for her hands. She took them with reverence, remembering how her father always promised to have them made, but never seemed to find the right craftsman. "Your hands are special, Clara," he used to tell her. "They deserve something made just for them." Next to the gloves, a silver brooch shaped like a horseshoe, the symbol of the ranch, and a brief note. "So you never forget where you come from, no matter where life takes you." Clara allowed herself a moment of vulnerability in the privacy of the cave, pressing the gloves against her chest while the tears she had contained for years finally found release. They were not just tears of loss, but also of revelation. Her father had truly seen her, had understood her silent struggles, and had loved her not despite her difference, but for the totality of who she was. When she emerged from the cave with the chest under her arm and the gloves on, the sunset was tinting the sky with copper tones that recalled the coat of James's bay horse. The man remained seated on a rock, his face turned toward the descending sun, as if he could perceive its colors through the heat on his skin. Clara paused to observe him. There was a stillness in him that contrasted with the agitation she felt. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the rough surface of his staff, reading the imperfections of the wood as others would read a book. "I found them," Clara announced, sitting beside him. James nodded, but did not ask about the documents. Instead, he extended a hand, accidentally brushing Clara's arm. "Excuse me," he immediately retracted. "No," she responded, and in an impulse took James's hand and placed it on the leather glove that now covered hers. "My father left them for me. I've never Never had ones that fit me well. James slid his fingers over the material, tracing the seams and the way they perfectly adapted to Clara's hand. "The leather is worked with mastery," he commented. "Whoever made them understood that strength and delicacy are not opposites but complements." Clara felt a warmth expanding from her chest. It was strange how this man, who had never seen her hands, could express what she had felt all her life, but had never been able to articulate. "I was always ashamed of them," she confessed in a low voice. "They're too big, too strong. They're not women's hands." James frowned slightly. "May I?" he asked, extending both hands. Clara hesitated a moment before placing her gloved hands between his. James held them with a reverence that disconcerted her, exploring them with an attention that no one had ever paid them. "These are hands that have carried weight," he said finally. "That have worked, protected, built. They are exactly the hands they should be, perfect in their purpose." Something untangled inside Clara, as if a knot that had been tightening her heart for years began to loosen. "How can you know that?" she asked, with a vulnerability that she would not have allowed herself to show days before. "You can't see them." James smiled, and there was a sweetness in his expression that contrasted with the hardness that his cowboy life had carved into his face. "I see with more than my eyes, Clara May Dawson," he responded simply. "And what I see in you is much more than what you have allowed yourself to see in yourself." The sun finally descended behind the mountains, plunging the landscape into a bluish twilight. In the distance, the lights of Dry Creek began to turn on, small beacons in the growing darkness. Clara thought of how appropriate James's nickname was, Lantern, illuminating paths that others could not see. "We should go back," she suggested, although a part of her wished to remain in that moment, away from the gazes and judgments of the town. James nodded, standing up with that fluid movement that seemed to defy his blindness. "Tomorrow we will confront Silas Crow," he said, more as a promise than as a plan. "But tonight allow yourself to celebrate that you are no longer alone in this fight, Clara May." Clara looked at her gloved hands, then at the blind man who had brought with him not only truths from the past, but also perhaps possibilities for a future she had never dared to imagine. "Don't call me Clara May," she said finally. "Just Clara, it's what my father called me." It was a small gesture, intimate but significant. "A door ajar." "Clara," James repeated, as if savoring the name. "It suits you. Clear and direct, like you." Together, they set off on the way back to the ranch, while the first star of the night appeared in the sky, bright and solitary, like a watchful eye over Dry Creek. The office of the Dry Creek Bank smelled of old paper and the excessively sweet cologne that Silas Crow used to mask his natural aroma of nervous sweat. The Reverend, who also served as bank administrator, adjusted his small glasses on his sharp nose while examining the documents that Clara had deposited on his desk. The expression on his face changed subtly. First disbelief, then a shadow of fear, quickly replaced by a tense smile that did not reach his eyes. "These papers are clearly forgeries, my dear Clara," he declared, pushing them toward her with a studied disdain. "Where did you find them? Or should I ask, who gave them to you?" Clara remained standing, refusing to sit in the small chair that Crow had offered, aware of how her height forced him to look up, altering the power dynamic that he always tried to establish. "We know what you did, Silas," she responded with a calmness that surprised even herself. "Ezekiel Harper and Cole Bennett have returned. They saw what happened that day in the canyon." The color abandoned Crow's face as quickly as if he had seen a ghost. Perhaps, thought Clara, that was exactly what was happening. "Those men died 4 years ago," he stammered, his voice losing the preacher cadence that he used to intimidate parishioners and debtors alike. "Just like my father, isn't that right?" Clara's voice acquired a dangerous edge. "But it turns out they are very much alive, and they have much to tell." The door of the office opened at that moment. James entered, guided by his staff but moving with the confidence of one who knows exactly where each obstacle is. Behind him, Sheriff Thomas Wilson, a middle-aged man with tired eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Reverend Crow," the sheriff greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "We have a matter to discuss." "This is a conspiracy," Crow hissed, standing. up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. "This woman and this blind impostor are trying to defame me. I am a man of God." James approached the desk, his serene face contrasting with Crow's agitation. "A man of God does not falsify property documents," he said calmly, "nor manipulate mortgages to take possession of others' lands." The sheriff placed another folder on the desk, more worn than the one Clara had brought. "We found this in the safe of the county office," he explained. "Judge Preston has been reviewing old cases. Curiously, several ranchers who lost their properties in recent years had dealings with you, Reverend." Clara observed how the certainties that had sustained Silas Crow began to crumble. The man who had terrorized the town with sermons about sin and condemnation now seemed diminished, cornered by the truth he had so feared. "You cannot prove anything," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "We already have," James responded. "The original documents of the double horseshoe show that Harlan Dawson paid his mortgage completely. You falsified the records after his disappearance." Clara took a step forward, imposing in her height. "The only thing I want to know is what happened to my father," she demanded, her eyes fixed on Crow. "I deserve the truth." Something broke in Crow's facade. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, Clara glimpsed the man behind the mask, small, frightened, consumed by greed and resentment. "It was an accident," he finally whispered. "We argued at the edge of the canyon. He discovered what I had been doing with the bank records. He threatened to expose me. We struggled, and he lost his balance." Clara closed her eyes, feeling the ground move beneath her feet. James, sensing her shock, silently approached her side, not touching her but offering his presence as an anchor. "Harper and Bennett saw it all," Crow continued, the words now coming out in an uncontrollable torrent. "I tried to explain to them, but they fled. I thought they had also died, that no one would ever know." The sheriff stepped forward, taking out his handcuffs. "Silas Crow, you are under arrest for fraud, falsification of documents, and obstruction of justice," he declared formally. "You will have the right to a fair trial, more than you gave to Harlan Dawson." As the sheriff escorted Crow out of the office, Clara remained motionless, absorbing the weight of the truth finally revealed. It wasn't the closure she had expected. It wouldn't bring her father back or erase the years of solitude and struggle, but it was a beginning. James waited in silence, respecting her internal process. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost a caress. "I cannot imagine what you are feeling," he said, "but if you allow me to say it, I believe your father would be proud of your strength today." Clara looked at her gloved hands, remembering the words of her father's letter. "Even the strongest trees need to bend sometimes, so as not to break with the wind." Perhaps this is what he meant, that true strength was not in remaining rigid and immovable, but in allowing oneself to feel, to adapt, to accept help. "I never got to say goodbye," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "All these years I've kept his room exactly as he left it, as if he would return any day." James nodded understandingly. "Sometimes goodbyes are not moments, but processes," he responded. "And sometimes we best honor those we have lost, not by clinging to their absence, but by living fully in their memory." Clara felt a solitary tear descend her cheek. With a gesture that would have been unthinkable days ago, she allowed it to roll freely, without hiding it or being ashamed of it. It was a small surrender, a crack in the armor she had built around her heart. "What do I do now?" she asked, not so much to James as to the universe. He smiled with that expression that suggested he saw beyond the evident. "Now, Clara," he responded, extending his hand toward her, "you begin to write your own story." Outside, the town of Dry Creek continued its routine, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded in the bank's office. But for Clara May Dawson, the entire world had changed. The invisible chains that had tied her to the past began to loosen, leaving space for possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. She took the hand offered by James, not because she needed guidance to walk, but as a conscious act of connection. Her fingers, large and strong inside the gloves her father had left her, intertwined with his in a grip that spoke of nascent trust and shared paths. Together they went out to the main street, where the midday sun bathed the town in a light that seemed brighter than ever. The news of Silas Crow's arrest spread through Dry Creek like wildfire in dry grass. The town, normally dormant under the relentless sun, now buzzed with speculations and revelations. Clara felt the gazes following her as she walked down the main street, some of amazement, others of newly discovered respect, and a few, from those closest to Crow, loaded with barely disguised resentment. Meredith's cantina, once a refuge where Clara could hide in plain sight, had become the epicenter of gossip. When she entered to collect her few belongings, the conversation ceased momentarily before resuming in a more contained murmur. Meredith, cleaning glasses behind the bar, gave her a tired but genuine smile. "You're becoming quite a legend, child," she commented, nodding with her head toward a group of cowboys who were heatedly discussing in a corner. "They say you confronted Crow like David to Goliath, although in your case the proportions are inverted." Clara sketched a shy smile, still uncomfortable with the attention. "I just sought the truth, Meredith. I didn't want to be a legend." The older woman left the glass she was cleaning and took Clara's hands in hers, a maternal gesture that had always comforted the young woman. "We rarely choose to become what the world needs us to be," she said softly. "Your father understood that. And I think you're beginning to understand it too." Outside, the sky suddenly darkened. A storm was approaching from the mountains, bringing with it that smell of moist earth and electricity that preceded summer downpours. Clara collected her small bundle and said goodbye to Meredith with a hug. "I'll come visit you," she promised. "You'd better," the cantina owner responded, gently pushing her toward the door. "Go, your blind cowboy and his friends are waiting for you." Clara felt a warmth rising up her neck at the mention of James as her cowboy, but she didn't correct Meredith. There was something in that simple possessiveness that awakened a new and disconcerting emotion in her. Outside, the wind had increased, shaking the awnings of the shops and raising dust whirlwinds in the street. Clara tightened her shawl around her shoulders and quickened her pace toward the stable, where they had agreed to meet. However, as she passed in front of the church, a figure in the shadows of the porch caught her attention. Luther Reed, Silas Crow's assistant and protégé, observed her with reddened eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. He was a thin, almost skeletal man with a devotion to Crow that bordered on the unhealthy. "You have destroyed a holy man," he accused, his voice broken by emotion. "The Reverend saved us all, showed us the path of redemption." Clara stopped, feeling the first drop of rain fall on her cheek. "Silas Crow was not a holy man, Luther," she responded firmly, but without aggression. "He used his position to take advantage of vulnerable people." "Lies!" Luther spat, descending the porch steps with nervous movements. "You are an abomination, Clara May Dawson, a woman who defies the natural order established by God. The Reverend tried to save you from yourself, and this is how you repay him." The words hit Clara like stones, awakening echoes of all the times she had heard variations of the same sentiment, that her mere existence, her body that did not fit into established molds, was something that should be corrected, contained, hidden. But this time, something was different. Instead of shrinking, of making herself small as she had tried all her life, Clara drew herself up to her full imposing height. "The only order that Silas Crow established was that of his own greed," she responded, her voice firm but calm. "And if God made me like this, tall and strong, who are you to question his work?" Luther stepped back, disconcerted by this new Clara, who did not bow her head before criticism. "The Reverend will return," he threatened, although his voice had lost conviction. "And when he does, those who betrayed him will pay for their disloyalty." The rain began to fall harder, as if the sky itself wanted to wash away Luther's poisonous words. Clara did not respond to his threat. Instead, with a dignity she had never before allowed herself to show, she continued on her way, letting the water clean not only her face, but also years of self-imposed shame. When she arrived at the stable, soaked but strangely renewed, she found James waiting patiently under the eavee, as protected from the rain. His face lit up upon perceiving her arrival, a smile forming on his lips. "I heard the rain and worried," he admitted. "Are you all right?" Clara stopped in front of him, observing how the raindrops slid from her own hair and fell onto the dirt floor. forming small puddles at her feet. She felt different, as if the confrontation with Luther had washed away something more than her body. "I'm fine," she responded, surprised to discover that it was true. "Better than fine, actually." James tilted his head, perceiving something in her voice that went beyond words. "You sound lighter," he commented, with that intuition that always disconcerted her, as if you had left something behind. Clara smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Maybe I did," she admitted. "Maybe I finally understood what my father wanted to say in his letter." "And what was that?" "That bending before the storm doesn't mean surrendering," she explained, finding the words as she spoke. "It means recognizing your own strength, enough to be flexible, to adapt without breaking." James extended a hand, finding her arm with precision and sliding his fingers until reaching her hand. The contact through the soaked leather of her gloves sent a warm current through Clara's cold body. "The strongest trees have deep roots," he murmured. "And you, Clara Dawson, are more rooted than you think." Ezekiel and Cole emerged from inside the stable, leading the horses saddled and ready to depart. The storm raged outside, turning the main street into a river of mud, but Clara didn't care. She had lived too long sheltered, waiting for storms to pass. It was time to learn to walk in the rain, to feel each drop not as a threat, but as a promise of renewal. They mounted in silence and rode under the downpour toward the double horseshoe. The ranch awaited, not as a reminder of the past, but as a canvas for the future. And for the first time in years, Clara May Dawson rode with her head held high, without trying to diminish her presence or contain her spirit. The rain continued to fall, washing away the accumulated dust of Dry Creek, while the wind whispered stories of change among the poplars along the path. The following days passed in a different rhythm at the Double Horseshoe Ranch. Silas Crow's arrest had triggered a broader investigation that revealed the magnitude of his manipulations. Several ranchers in the region discovered that the debts they believed they had been falsified or artificially inflated. With each new revelation, Harlan Dawson's reputation was gradually restored. He was no longer the irresponsible rancher who had abandoned his obligations, but a victim of Crow's greed, a man who had tried to defend what was right. Clara observed these changes with mixed feelings. The vindication of her father brought comfort, but also underscored the finality of his loss. There would be no miraculous return, only the truth, with all its raw simplicity. On a particularly clear morning, Clara was on the ranch porch, repairing a chair that had been broken for years. Her hands, protected by the gloves her father had left her, worked the wood with a precision she no longer tried to hide. The strength she had once considered a curse now flowed naturally, allowing her to straighten nails and adjust planks with ease. James emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. He moved around the ranch with surprising familiarity, as if he had memorized every corner, every obstacle. "I hear you're rebuilding," he commented, offering her one of the cups. "It sounds good." Clara accepted the coffee, observing how the steam rose in spirals against the morning light. "The ranch needs many repairs," she responded. "I've neglected too many things these years." James sat beside her on the porch step, his shoulder lightly brushing against hers. It was a casual but comforting contact, one that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "I'm not just talking about the ranch," he said softly. "You're also rebuilding something." Clara contemplated the horizon, where the mountains stood out against a sky of an impossible blue. Zeke and Cole had departed at dawn toward the neighboring town, carrying documents for the judge and bringing provisions. "I suppose so," she finally admitted. "It's strange. For years my life revolved around keeping myself invisible despite my size. Now you're occupying the space that should always have been yours," James completed. Clara looked at him, fascinated as always by how this man, who had never seen her face, seemed to understand her more deeply than those who had known her all. Her life. "How did you lose it?" she asked abruptly, surprising herself with the question she had never dared to formulate. "Your sight, I mean." James didn't seem surprised or offended by the question. He turned his face toward her, and his clear eyes reflected the sunlight like crystalline water. "Fever," he responded simply. "I was 17. The doctors said I was lucky to survive." "I'm sorry," said Clara, feeling the insufficiency of the words. James smiled. That smile that transformed his weathered face and gave it an almost luminous quality. "I'm not," he responded. "At first, of course, I felt lost, robbed. But with time I discovered that I had gained as much as I had lost. I learned to listen to what others don't hear, to feel what others don't perceive." He paused, as if considering whether to continue. Then he added, "Without my blindness, I probably would never have truly known you, Clara. I would have seen only what everyone sees, your height, your physical strength. I wouldn't have perceived your gentleness, your patience, your silent determination." The words fell between them like stones in a pond, creating ripples that altered the surface of their relationship, revealing unexplored depths. Clara sat down her cup and took up the hammer again, needing something to occupy her hands while she processed what she had just heard. She drove a nail with perhaps too much force, sinking it completely into the wood with a single blow. "I don't know how to be this new person," she finally confessed. "The one who doesn't hide, the one who isn't ashamed." James extended a hand, finding Clara's forearm with precision. "It's not a new person," he corrected gently. "It's who you've always been beneath all those layers of protection. And you don't have to know everything immediately. You build one day at a time, one board at a time, like this chair." Clara looked at the chair she was repairing. It was her father's favorite, where he used to sit at sunset to smoke his pipe and contemplate his lands. She had preserved it despite its ruinous state, unable to get rid of it, but also to repair it, as if doing so would be a final admission of his absence. "I never thought I would fix it," she murmured. "And how does it feel to do it?" Clara considered the question, running her fingers over the newly worked wood. "Like honoring his memory," she responded. "Like allowing him to remain present in some way." James nodded, understanding. "That is real mourning," he said. "It's not forgetting or getting stuck in the past. It's finding ways to carry those we love with us while we continue moving forward." The sound of hooves approaching interrupted their conversation. Clara stood up, shielding her eyes from the sun with a hand. It wasn't Zeke and Cole, but a solitary rider who was approaching at a full gallop. She recognized Billy, the son of the telegraph operator. "Miss Dawson," the boy shouted even before completely dismounting. "An urgent telegram has arrived. It's about Reverend Crow." Clara took the paper that the boy offered her with trembling hands. As she read, she felt the ground move beneath her feet. "He has escaped," she announced, her voice barely audible. "Silas Crow escaped during his transfer to the county courthouse, and according to this, he has sworn revenge." James rose immediately, his posture subtly changing, shoulders straighter, head slightly inclined as if listening to something distant. "Does it say anything else?" he asked, his voice now tinged with contained tension. Clara reread the telegram. "Only that he is believed to be heading toward here. The sheriff is organizing a posse to search for him," but she didn't need to finish the sentence. Both knew what it meant. The double horseshoe was too isolated, help could be slow to arrive. James nodded, making a decision. "Billy," he said, addressing the boy, "ride back and tell the sheriff we'll be alert. And if you see Zeke and Cole on the way, tell them to return immediately." When the boy departed, James turned to Clara, his expression serene despite the threat. "I will not allow him to harm you," he declared with a simplicity that made his promise even more powerful. Clara observed the man before her, blind but more perceptive than any sighted person, apparently vulnerable but possessing an inner strength that rivaled her own. And in that moment, she understood that the true reconstruction had begun long before she took hammer and nails to repair a broken chair. It had begun the instant James McGraw entered Meredith's cantina and truly saw her, initiating the long process of helping her see herself. "We will face this together," she responded, taking his hand. "Like everything else." The sun reached its zenith, bathing the ranch in a bright light that left no place for shadows. For now. But Clara knew that darkness was approaching, bringing with it a storm different from any she had faced before. Evening arrived with a deceptive calm. Clara and James had spent the hours preparing the ranch for the possible arrival of Silas Crow. With the help of two loyal cowboys who had worked for her father and had returned after learning the truth, they secured doors and windows, prepared strategically located lamps to eliminate blind spots, and established surveillance shifts. The main house, a solid structure built by Clara's grandfather with pine logs and local stone, became a small fortress. The stable and corrals were too exposed, so they had moved the most valuable horses to a nearby canyon, where they would be safe and hidden. As night fell, Clara was in the kitchen, preparing strong coffee for those who would keep watch. Her movements were precise and efficient, but her mind wandered. The threat of Crow had awakened memories of her father, how he insisted she learn to shoot even though she hated weapons, how he taught her to recognize sounds in the darkness, how he showed her hiding places and escape routes on the ranch lands. "One day you might need it, little oak," he would say, and she, young and naive, thought he was referring to abstract dangers, storms, wild animals, perhaps occasional bandits. She never imagined that her father foresaw such a specific threat. "I smell coffee," James's voice interrupted her thoughts. As he entered the kitchen, guided by the aroma, Clara smiled despite the tension. "It's the only culinary talent I inherited from my father," she responded, pouring a cup. "He said that coffee should be strong enough for a spoon to stand upright in it." James accepted the cup with gratitude, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. These small contacts had become more frequent between them, like a silent language. That was developing over time. "Zeke and Cole should have returned by now," Clara commented, looking out the window toward the darkened path. James took a sip of coffee, nodding appreciatively at its intensity. "The telegram might have reached them in the neighboring town," he reasoned. "If so, it's possible they decided to join the search for Crow." Clara sat across from him at the oak table, the same one where days ago they had shared revelations. That changed their lives. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of intimacy amidst the uncertainty. "Are you afraid?" James asked suddenly. The question took Clara by surprise. For years she had hidden her fears, as carefully as she hid her strength, considering both as weaknesses that exposed her to judgments and rejections. "Yes," she finally admitted, "not of Crow himself, but of losing what I am just beginning to find." "And what is that?" Clara contemplated the question, seeking words for feelings she was just beginning to recognize. "My place," she responded, after a moment. "My truth. The possibility of simply being who I am without apologizing for it." She looked at her hands wrapped in the gloves her father had left her. They had begun to mold to her, adapting to her movements like a second skin. "And you," she added in a low voice, with a vulnerability she would not have allowed herself weeks ago. "I am afraid of losing you." James extended his hand across the table, palm up, a silent invitation. Clara placed hers on his, and their fingers intertwined naturally, like pieces of a puzzle finding their place. "There's something I want to give you," said James, using his free hand to search in the pocket of his vest. "I was going to wait, but perhaps this is the right moment." He extracted a small object and placed it on the table between them. It was a compass of polished brass, antique but well preserved. Its lid was engraved with an intricately detailed windrose. "It belonged to my father," he explained. "He gave it to me when I lost my sight as a cruel joke," I thought then. "What use is a compass to me if I can't see where it points?" I asked him bitterly. He paused, his fingers lightly caressing the metal. "It's not for you to see where it points," he responded. "It's for you to remember that there is always a north even in the most absolute darkness." With time I understood what he wanted to tell me. That direction doesn't depend on what we see, but on what we know inside. Clara took the compass with reverence, feeling its solid and comforting weight in her palm. "I can't accept it," she murmured. "It's your heritage." James smiled, that gesture that illuminated his face from within. "That's why I want you to have." "Tut," he responded, "because you, Clara Dawson, have been my north when everything else seemed lost." Time seemed to stop in the kitchen of the Double Horseshoe Ranch. Outside, the night deepened, and the threat of Silas Crow floated like a shadow at the limits of their consciousness. But in that moment, there existed only the space between them, charged with unspoken words and barely glimpsed possibilities. Clara closed her fingers around the compass, feeling how its metal warmed with the contact of her skin. It was more than an object. It was a promise, an anchor, a reminder that even in the approaching darkness there was a clear direction. "I will guard it with my life," she promised, her voice firm despite the emotion that overwhelmed her. The sound of a whistle outside the house broke the moment. It was the agreed signal. Someone was approaching the ranch. Both stood up simultaneously. James took his staff, which he had leaned against the table, and Clara carefully put the compass in the pocket of her skirt. Next, to her father's watch. 2 inheritances, 2 promises, 2 forces that would guide her in what was to come. "Remember," said James as they headed toward the door, "whatever happens tonight, you are no longer alone." Clara nodded, though he couldn't see it. But perhaps he could feel it, that new determination that had settled in her like a seed finally flowering. "I know," she responded, her voice clear and firm, "and Silas Crow is about to discover it too." The night enveloped them as they went out to the porch, where the cowboys had already positioned themselves with rifles. In the distance, the dust, raised by approaching riders, shone faintly under the light of the crescent moon. Midnight found Clara on the ranch porch, wrapped in her mother's shawl and with James's compass in her hand. The riders they had spotted turned out to be Zeke and Cole, returning with news. The sheriff and his men had found Crow's trail heading west, away from Dry Creek. But no one at the ranch allowed themselves to lower their guard. They knew the Reverend's cunning too well to trust obvious clues. The night air carried with it the aroma of sage and juniper. Clara breathed deeply, letting the familiar essence of the desert fill her lungs. This was her home, her heritage, the place where every stone and every shrub contained memories of generations of Dawsons. Neither Silas Crow nor his hatred would succeed in taking it from her. The creaking of wood announced James's arrival, who moved with that silent confidence that always amazed her. Without a word, he took a seat beside her on the porch step. "Beautiful." "Night," he commented, his face turned toward the starry sky. "I can feel the heat that the earth returns after a day under the sun." Clara observed him in profile, fascinated as always by how he perceived the world through senses that she was just beginning to explore. "How do you do it?" she asked in a low voice. "You seem to see more than many who have sight." James smiled. That smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost luminous. "It's not seeing more," he responded. "It's paying attention differently. When one sense is turned off, the others sharpen to compensate. But anyone can do it, if they are willing to truly listen, to truly feel." He paused, turning his head slightly, as if detecting something. "For example, right now there is an owl in the barn. I can hear the soft flapping when it changes position, and the wind comes from the southeast, bringing the scent of the dry creek and the poplars that grow there." Clara closed her eyes, trying to perceive what James described. At first she only heard the silence characteristic of the desert night, but gradually sounds began to emerge, the distant hooting of an owl, the whisper of poplar leaves swayed by the breeze, the faint chirping of a cricket under the porch steps. "I hear it," she murmured, surprised. "The owl, the poplars, everything." "It has always been there," James responded softly. "The world is much richer than our eyes allow us to see. Sometimes sight is a distraction that prevents us from perceiving the deeper layers of reality." Clara opened her eyes and contemplated the stars that speckled the night sky like silver dust on black velvet. The compass in her hand faintly reflected the moonlight, its needle faithfully pointing toward the invisible north. "My father used to tell me that stars are the eyes of our ancestors, watching over us," she shared, surprising herself with the memory. "When I was a child and afraid, he would take me outside and show me the sky. 'You are never alone,' he would say. 'All the Dawsons who have lived on this land are looking after you.'" "It's a beautiful belief," he commented, "and perhaps truer than we imagine. Those we love never complete. Why leave us?" Clara contemplated the idea, finding comfort in it. Perhaps her father really was there in a way, guiding her through the letters and objects he had left, through the lessons he had taught her, through the people he had sent into her life, like James. "If we survive this," she said abruptly, "what will you do afterward? Will you continue on your way?" The question had been weighing on her heart since the shadow of Crow loomed over them. James had arrived with a purpose, to deliver her father's letter, to help her discover the truth. Once that mission was fulfilled, what would keep him in Dry Creek? James remained silent for a moment, as if carefully considering his response. For Years I have wandered without a place to call home, he finally responded. My life has been constant movement, following the wind, responding to promises made, debts paid. He paused, and his hand found Clara's with that precision that always surprised her. But for the first time I feel I have found a place where I could put down roots. If they would accept me, of course. His voice contained an unformulated question, a vulnerability that resonated with Clara's own. It wasn't just James asking if he could stay at the ranch. It was a man asking if there was space for him in the life she was rebuilding. Clara intertwined her fingers with his, marveling at how her hand, which she had always considered too big, too strong, fit perfectly with James's. This ranch has always welcomed those who need a home, she responded, carefully choosing her words. My grandfather established it as a refuge in difficult times. My father continued that tradition. And I would be honored to keep it alive. It wasn't a declaration of love in conventional terms. Clara was still learning to inhabit this new version of herself, to trust her own feelings, but it was an open door, an invitation to a shared future. James brought Clara's hand to his lips and deposited a soft kiss on her knuckles, a gesture so full of reverence and promise that she felt something untangling within her. Then, when this is over, he said, we will talk about that future. The moment was interrupted by the sound of a distant shot, followed by the gallop of a horse approaching at full speed. Clara and James stood up simultaneously. Zeke emerged from the shadows of the stable, rifle in hand. Someone is coming, he announced, his voice tense, and they don't seem to be coming in peace. Clara pressed the compass in her hand one last time before carefully storing it in her pocket. The north was clear now, regardless of the approaching storm. Let them come, she responded, her voice firm and determined. We are ready. The rider approached rapidly, his silhouette standing out against the starry horizon. The vigil had ended. The hour of truth had arrived for the Double Horseshoe Ranch and for Clara May Dawson. The rider, who was approaching at a gallop, turned out to be one of the young deputies of the sheriff, his pale face intermittently illuminated by the moon. He dismounted with urgency, almost stumbling in his haste. Miss Dawson, he exclaimed, panting, Crow is in Dry Creek. He has set fire to the church and Meredith's cantina. The entire town is in danger. The words fell like stones in Clara's stomach. Meredith, the woman who had been more mother than employer to her, the inhabitants of the town who might have whispered behind her back, but who did not deserve Crow's vengeful fury. Is Meredith all right? She asked, her voice tense. She was outside when the fire started, the boy responded. But there are people trapped. The sheriff sent me to seek help. The fire is spreading rapidly. Clara exchanged a glance with James, though he couldn't see it. They didn't need words to communicate. In the brief time they had been together, they had developed an understanding that transcended the visual. We must go, said Clara, and it wasn't a question. James nodded, his face marked by a serene determination. Zeke, Cole, he called. Can you keep the ranch secure? This could be a stratagem to draw us away from here. The cowboys nodded grimly. With years of experience between them, they were more than capable of protecting the Double Horseshoe. In minutes, Clara and James were riding at full speed toward Dry Creek, accompanied by the young deputy. The night was clear, without clouds to hide the moon, allowing them to maintain a rapid pace despite the darkness. As they approached the town, an orange glow began to tint the horizon. The smell of smoke arrived shortly after, acrid and threatening. Clara spurred her horse, feeling how fear transformed into determination within her. Dry Creek was burning. The church, a wooden structure that had been Silas Crow's pride, was completely enveloped in flames that reached the sky like accusing fingers. Meredith's cantina, on the other side of the main street, was also burning, although the fire seemed more recent there. Clara dismounted even before her horse had completely stopped, running toward the center of the chaos. Townspeople formed human, chains passing buckets of water, trying to contain the fire that threatened to spread to adjacent buildings. Clara! Meredith's voice emerged among the crackling of the flames and the shouts of warning. Thank God you're all right. The older woman made her way through the crowd, her face stained with soot but her eyes bright with relief. I thought Crow would have gone to the ranch first, she continued, briefly hugging Clara. He was shouting your name while burning my cantina, swearing he would find you. A crash followed by screams interrupted their conversation. Part of the roof of the general store had collapsed, trapping those who were trying to save merchandise from its interior. Without hesitation, Clara ran toward the building. Her height and strength, which for so long had been a source of shame, now became her greatest advantage. Where others could not advance through the debris, she could make her way. Where fallen beams blocked the path, her hands could lift them enough to create an escape route. James, guided by sounds and heat, organized the citizens into efficient groups, directing them to combat the fire strategically. His voice, calm but authoritative, emerged over the chaos like a beacon in the storm. "Concentrate the water on the edges, not in the center of the fire," he instructed. "Wet the roofs of nearby buildings to prevent sparks from igniting them." Clara emerged from the general store with an elderly man supported on her shoulder and a child in her arms, delivering them to willing hands before submerging herself again in the chaos. For what seemed an eternity, they worked tirelessly. Clara, using her strength to rescue people and goods, to move obstacles too heavy for others, to hold structures about to collapse while others escaped. James using his sharpened senses to detect trapped people that others could not see through the smoke, to anticipate where the fire would spread, to maintain calm amidst the panic. Gradually, the battle against the fire began to tilt in their favor. The church was lost and the cantina severely damaged, but they had managed to contain the flames before they consumed the entire town. It was then that Clara saw him, Silas Crow, standing in the shadow between two buildings, observing his work with an expression that mixed satisfaction and fury. His eyes found hers across the smoky street, and a twisted smile formed on his face. Clara moved toward him, but Crow disappeared into the darkness. Without hesitation, she followed him, moving away from the center of town toward the communal stables. "I knew you would come, abomination." Crow's voice emerged from the shadows, loaded with hatred and madness. "Always putting others before yourself, as if that could compensate for what you are." Clara stopped, scrutinizing the darkness. The stable was illuminated only by the distant light of the fire and some moonbeams that filtered through the cracks. "In the roof, what I am, Silas, is exactly what was needed tonight," she responded calmly. "My size and my strength have saved lives. Can you say the same about your hatred?" A bitter laugh emerged from a dark corner. "Your father said the same thing," said Crow, finally appearing with a torch in one hand and a knife in the other. "Until the end, defending his little oak. He never understood that you were a mockery of divine creation, a woman who is not fair woman." The words hit Clara as they used to, but now they bounced off a new inner strength. She was no longer the insecure young woman who shrank from criticism. She was Clara Dawson of the Double Horseshoe, daughter of Harlan, heir to a tradition of courage and compassion. "I won't waste time explaining to you what you have already decided not to understand, Silas," she said, drawing herself up to her full height. "You have done enough harm. It's time for this to end." Crow advanced, the light of the torch projecting grotesque shadows that transformed his face into a demonic mask. "You're right about one thing," he hissed. "This ends today." He threw the high torch toward a pile of dry hay, which immediately caught fire. The flames rose voraciously, creating a burning barrier between them. Clara stepped back, looking for an exit, while the fire spread rapidly through the stable. Smoke began to fill, the space making breathing and vision difficult. Through the flames, she saw Crow heading toward the back door, ready to escape, leaving her trapped in the hell he had created. It was then that a figure emerged from among the smoke, moving with impossible precision between the growing flames. "James!" Clara shouted, both in warning and in amazement. The blind cowboy was heading directly toward Crow, guided by sounds that only he could discern amid the crackling of the fire. His staff moved with the speed and precision of a weapon, hitting Crow in the legs and making him fall. The Reverend rose staggering, the knife still in his hand, and blindly charged. James dodged the attack, but tripped over a fallen beam, momentarily losing his balance. Clara didn't hesitate. Through the smoke and flames, she ran toward them, ignoring the searing heat and the burning debris. With a fluid movement, she grabbed Crow by the arm that held the knife and twisted it, forcing him to drop the weapon. The Reverend screamed, more from rage than from pain, and writhed in her grip. "Let me go, monster," he spat. Clara held him firmly but without applying all her strength. Even now, facing the man who had killed her father and threatened everything she loved, she could not stoop to his level of cruelty. "It's over, Silas," she said with a calmness that contrasted with the chaos around her. "You have lost." An ominous creaking above their heads announced that the roof of the stable was about to give way. James approached, taking Clara by the arm. "We have to get out," he urged. "Now!" Clara nodded, dragging Crow with her toward the nearest exit. But the Reverend, in a final act of defiance or perhaps madness, broke free from her grip and ran in the opposite direction, toward the heart of the fire. "Silas, no!" Clara shouted, trying to follow him. James stopped her with surprising strength. "He has chosen his path," he said firmly. "I will not let you sacrifice yourself for him." A burning beam fell between them, and where Crow had disappeared, as if sealing the decision. James pulled Clara toward the door, and together they emerged into the night, just as the roof of the stable collapsed in an explosion of sparks and burning wood. The sheriff and his men came running, attracted by the new fire. Clara, covered in soot and with small burns on her arms, briefly explained what had happened. A quick search confirmed what they already knew. No one could have survived the collapse. Meredith approached limping, wrapping Clara in a fierce hug. "Always knew there was more to you than this town could see," she murmured in her ear. "Tonight you have proven it to everyone." Clara looked around, at the faces of the inhabitants of Dry Creek, who observed her no longer with mockery or distrust, but with a mixture of respect and gratitude. Her eyes found those of James, who remained a few steps away, his face illuminated by the dying flames, a small smile on his lips. On that night of destruction, something new had been born in Dry Creek, and in the heart of Clara May Dawson, the seeds of an unexpected future began to take root. Dawn arrived in Dry Creek with an almost dreamlike quality, the golden light filtering through the smoke that still rose from the charred buildings. Clara, seated on the steps of the sheriff's office that had miraculously survived the fire, observed the movement of the town that was beginning to assess the damages and organize for reconstruction. Her hands, scraped and blistered from the night of rescues, rested on her lap. The gloves her father had left her had been partially scorched, but they were still functional, as if they had been designed to withstand even fire. An appropriate symbol, she thought, for what had happened with herself. Tested by the flames, marked but not destroyed. James approached with 2 cups of coffee, guided by the sound of her breathing to find her. He sat beside her, offering her one of the cups. "It's not as good as yours," he warned with a small smile, "but it serves its purpose." Clara accepted the coffee, allowing the heat of the cup to warm her sore hands. "Thank you," she murmured, "both. For the coffee and for everything else, for things she still couldn't find words to express." James nodded, understanding the multiple levels of her gratitude. They remained silent for a moment, observing, she with her sight, he with all his other senses, how Dry Creek slowly began to shake off the shock of the previous night. "Dr. Stevens says no one died," James finally commented. "Some injured, minor burns mostly, but everyone will survive." "A miracle," Clara responded, aware of how different the outcome could have been without the town's rapid response. "Not a miracle," James gently corrected. "The result of people helping each other, of you using your strength to save others instead of hiding it." Clara contemplated this perspective, allowing the truth of his words to settle in her. For years she had seen her size and strength as a curse, something that separated her from others. Last night, for the first time, it had been precisely what connected her with her community, what allowed her to serve and protect. Meredith emerged from among the smoking ruins of her cantina, carrying a wooden box with recovered objects. Seeing Clara, she changed direction and approached them. "Look what I found intact," she said, extracting a framed photograph from the box. "Your father and you, the day you won that lassoing contest at 12 years old." Clara took the frame with trembling hands. The photograph, though slightly discolored by time, showed Harlan Dawson with his arm proudly placed around the shoulders of a young Clara, both smiling widely. Clara remembered that day, how her father had insisted she participate despite her protests, how the other children had mocked her, until she demonstrated a skill that left them open-mouthed. "I had never seen this photograph," she commented, tracing the outline of the image with a finger. Meredith smiled, her eyes tired but warm. "Your father gave it to me to keep in the cantina," she explained. "He wanted everyone to see how proud he was of you, but I knew it would embarrass you, so I kept it in my private office." Clara felt a wave of emotion passing through her. Even then her father had seen value in what she considered her greatest shame. He had celebrated her difference while she struggled to hide it. "Thank you for keeping it," she said, her voice thick with contained emotion. It means a lot to me." Meredith nodded, understanding. Then, with the practicality that characterized her, she changed the subject. "Well, I don't know about you, but I have no intention of letting a madman like Silas Crowe have the last word about my business," she declared firmly. "I'm going to rebuild, bigger and better than before." "We'll all help you," Clara assured, noting how the word all now included people who had barely tolerated her before. Meredith gave her an affectionate pat on the shoulder. "I know, dear, and when it's ready, I hope that you and your blind cowboy will be my first customers." With a wink that made Clara blush, the cantina owner walked away to continue her recovery work. James, who had remained silent during the exchange, smiled. "I like how that sounds," he commented. "Your blind cowboy." Clara felt the heat in her cheeks intensify, grateful that he couldn't see it. "Does it bother you?" she asked, surprised by her own audacity. "Being called that, I mean." James tilted, his head considering the question. "There was a time when it would have bothered me," he admitted, "when I still resisted accepting my blindness, when I saw it as something that defined me negatively." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. "But I've learned that we are more than our labels, Clara. I'm a cowboy who happens to be blind, just as you are a woman who happens to be extraordinarily strong. It's not all we are, but neither is it something we should deny." Clara contemplated his words, recognizing in them the same lesson she was painfully learning. "And as for being your cowboy," added James with a smile that illuminated his face, "that's a label I would wear with pride, if you allow me." Time seemed to stop on the steps of the sheriff's office while the sun rose over Dry Creek, bathing the ruins and new beginnings equally in its golden light. Clara looked at James, really looked at him, not just with her eyes but with her entire being. This man who had arrived in her life as a messenger from the past and had become a promise of the future. With a decision that surprised even herself, Clara leaned in and deposited a soft kiss on James's cheek. A simple but deeply meaningful gesture for someone who had always maintained physical distance from others, for fear of her own strength. "I would like that," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "for you to be my cowboy." James turned his face toward her, his clear eyes seeking hers by instinct. His hand found Clara's, intertwining their fingers with that precision that always amazed her. "Then it's decided," he said simply. A shout from across the street interrupted the moment. The sheriff was calling for volunteers to begin clearing the debris from the church. Clara and James stood up simultaneously, their hands still intertwined. "I suppose it's time to rebuild," said Clara, looking toward the town that was awakening to a new reality. James nodded, picking up his staff with his free hand. "That's what life is about, isn't it?" he responded. "Falling and getting up, burning the old to make space for the new. Rebuilding, not exactly as it was before, but as it could be." Together, they descended the steps and joined the inhabitants of Dry Creek, ready to contribute with what each could offer. She with her physical strength, he with his acute perception, both with the shared determination to transform ashes into opportunities. And as they worked, side by side with people who had previously marginalized them, Clara understood that they were not just rebuilding buildings. They were forging community, weaving new bonds, creating a place where difference was not a reason for isolation, but for celebration. In her pocket, James's compass and her father's watch rested together, tangible symbols of an honored past and a future to discover. And for the first time in years, Clara May Dawson did not feel too big for the world around her. She felt, simply, exactly the size she should be. The weeks following the night of the fire passed in a constant rhythm of work and renewal. Dry Creek, rising from its ashes like a phoenix from the desert, began to show signs of transformation that went beyond mere physical reconstruction. Clara divided her days between the double horseshoe ranch and the town, contributing her strength where it was most needed. Whether lifting beams for the new roof of Meredith's cantina or transporting materials that would require 2 men, her presence had become a pillar of community recovery. What surprised her most, however, was not the speed with which the buildings took shape again, but the change in the way people looked at her. The strange glances and mocking whispers had been replaced by respectful greetings and occasional requests for help. Her difference, once a barrier, was now valued as a gift to the community. One afternoon, while helping to place the glass in the new windows of the cantina, Clara observed James on the main street. He was sitting on a bench under the great oak that had survived the fire, surrounded by children from the town. With expressive gestures and melodious voices, he was teaching them to recognize birds by their song, knowledge he had perfected over years of depending on his ears more than his eyes. The children, fascinated, closed their eyes and tried to imitate the sounds that James reproduced. Their laughter resonated in the newly cleared plaza, a sound more comforting than any beam placed or wall raised. "I've never seen the little one so enthusiastic about learning something," commented Meredith, who had approached to supervise the work. "Your James has a gift." Clara smiled at the naturalness with which Meredith referred to him as her James. It was something that still surprised her, this new shared identity they were building, as gradual and natural as the reconstruction occurring around them. "He has a different way of experiencing the world," she responded, "and a generosity in sharing it." Meredith nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's love, you know," she said simply. "Not the grand gestures they tell about in romantic novels. It's sharing your way of seeing the world with someone else. It's building something together day by day." Clara felt a warmth expanding in her chest at these words. Love. It was a word that had appeared in her thoughts with increasing frequency, though she had not yet pronounced it aloud. It seemed too big, too important to be said casually. "I have something for you," continued Meredith, pulling from her pocket a small object wrapped in cloth. "I found it among the debris of the old bank office. I think it belongs to you." Clara carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a small rusty iron key. She recognized it immediately. It was the key to her father's personal safe, which had been lost after his disappearance. "Where did you find it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Among Crow's papers," explained Meredith. "It seems he kept it all these years, probably hoping to find whatever it opens." Clara closed her fingers around the key, feeling its cold weight against her palm. Another fragment of the puzzle that was her father's life and death, another thread that connected her with her past while she built her future. "Thank you," she said, storing the key in the pocket of her skirt, next to James's compass and her father's watch. "It means a lot to me." Meredith gave her an affectionate pat on the arm before heading to supervise another aspect of the construction. Clara remained a moment longer observing James with the children, now engrossed in a game where they tried to identify objects just by their sound when falling on the earth. That night, back at the Double Horseshoe Ranch, Clara carefully examined the key under the light of the oil lamp. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the place where so many important conversations had occurred since James's arrival in her life. "Any idea what it might open?" he asked, seated across from her, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the worn wood. Clara turned the key, observing the distinctive marks in its design. "I think it's for the safe that my father kept in his study," she responded. "But when he disappeared, the safe was no longer there. I assumed Crow had taken it along with other valuables." James tilted his head, processing this information. "What if it wasn't so?" he suggested. "Silas had the key, but perhaps he never found the safe. Your father could have hidden it, foreseeing what might happen." Clara considered this possibility. Her father had always been cautious, planning for contingencies that others didn't even consider. Would he have hidden the safe, knowing that Crow might look for it? "If I wanted to hide something important," she reflected aloud, "something that no one else should find out, where would I put it?" She closed her eyes, trying to think like her father. Harlan Dawson had been a man of habits and traditions, deeply connected with the land he had worked all his life. He wouldn't trust complicated hiding places or elaborate tricks. He would trust in simplicity and in the intimate knowledge of the ranch that only his family possessed. Suddenly her eyes opened. "The tree," she said, standing up abruptly. "The oak where he carved my growth marks." James rose too, perceiving the urgency in her voice. "Do you think he hid it there?" Clara was already taking an oil lamp from the shelf. "My father always said that the best secrets are those hidden in plain sight," she responded, her voice vibrant with excitement. "No one would think to look for a safe in the trunk of a tree." Despite the darkness, Clara did not hesitate to head toward the great oak that stood solitary, on a small elevation about 200 meters from the main house. James followed her, guided by the sound of her steps and the oscillating light of the lamp. The oak, older than the ranch itself, extended its branches like protective arms over a small clearing. It was a special place for the Dawsons. Clara's grandfather had been buried under its shade, and each generation had planted a sapling from its acorns when a new member of the family was born. On the east side of the trunk, partially hidden by the natural growth of the bark, were the marks that Harlan had carved year after year to record his daughter's growth. Clara passed her fingers over them, each notch representing a shared moment, a constancy of paternal love that had been the foundation of her life. "Here," she murmured, more to herself than to James. "It has to be here." She carefully examined the trunk, looking for any irregularity, any sign her father might have left. Finally, near the base where the roots began to emerge from the earth, she noticed a section of bark that felt different to the touch. She pressed lightly, and to her surprise the section yielded, revealing a small cavity carved into the heart of the tree. Inside, protected from the elements by careful natural engineering, rested a metal box the size of a large book. Clara extracted it with reverence, feeling its substantial weight in her hands. "I found it," she said, her voice mixing amazement and sadness. "It was here all this time, waiting." They returned to the house in silence, each absorbed in their thoughts. In the kitchen, under the more intense light of the lamps, Clara placed the box on the table and with slightly trembling hands inserted the key into the lock. It turned gently, and the mechanism yielded with a click that seemed to resonate in the silence of the night. Upon opening the lid, the first thing she saw was an envelope with her name written in her father's familiar handwriting. Beneath it were documents, a small leather sack and an object wrapped in cloth. "There's a letter," she explained to James, taking the envelope, "and other objects." "Do you want me to leave you alone to read it?" he asked delicately. Clara considered the offer for a moment, but then extended her hand, finding James's on the table. "No," she responded. "I want you to stay. Whatever is here, I want to share it with you." Carefully, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter, immediately recognizing the paper her father used for important correspondence, with the seal of the double horseshoe engraved in the upper corner. "My dear Clara, if you are reading this, it means that you have found not only the bow, hex, but also the strength to face difficult truths. You always had that strength within you, although sometimes you doubted it as much as you doubted the value of your extraordinary body. I have left for you the original property documents of the double horseshoe. You will also find the deed to the adjacent lands that I secretly purchased over the years. Together, they form a legacy greater than I have ever told you about, one that Silas Crow has coveted since he discovered its existence. The sack contains gold, not much, but enough to help you rebuild if necessary. I always preferred land to money, but I learned that sometimes you need one to protect the other. The last object is perhaps the most important, your mother's engagement ring. She wore it until the day she left us, and always said that someday it would be yours, not to tie you to a marriage, but as a symbol that you deserve a love that sees you completely, that celebrates your uniqueness instead of fearing it. Clara, my little oak, you are now the guardian of the double horseshoe. I trust that you will make it flourish in your own way, perhaps different from mine, but equally valuable. With all the love a father can feel. Harlan. Clara finished reading, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. James waited patiently, respecting the sacred moment between father and daughter, that unfolded across time and absence. Finally, Clara unwrapped the object in the cloth, revealing a delicate silver ring with a small blue stone set in it, so similar to the color of James's eyes that the parallel seemed almost predestined. "It's beautiful," said James when she described it, "like a promise that has patiently waited to be fulfilled." Clara contemplated the ring in her palm, then the documents and the sack of gold. They weren't simply objects, they were seeds that her father had planted for a future he would not see, but in which he had deeply believed. "You were right," she said, looking at James with a new clarity. "Rebuilding doesn't mean exactly replicating what existed before. It means honoring the foundations while creating something new, something of your own." James smiled, that smile that illuminated his face from within. "And what do you want to build, Clara Dawson?" Clara looked out the kitchen window, toward the starry night that covered the double horseshoe. The ranch, the town, her own life, all were in the process of transformation, of becoming something she couldn't yet fully visualize, but that she felt with growing certainty. "A home," she finally responded, "not just for me, but for all who need a place where they can be accepted just as they are." She closed her hand around the ring, feeling its metal warm with the contact, as if absorbing her determination and transforming it into possibility. "Starting with us," she added, with a vulnerability that she would have hidden before but that she now offered as a gift. James extended his hand across the table, palm up, a silent invitation. Clara placed hers on his, and their fingers intertwined, naturally like roots seeking depth. "It seems like an excellent beginning to me," he responded simply. Outside, the night wind whispered among the leaves of the old oak, mixing past and future in a present full of promises yet to be fulfilled. Spring arrived in Dry Creek like a fulfilled promise, bringing with it soft rains that transformed the arid landscape into a tapestry of greens and golds. The desert, normally austere, flowered with temporary but intense life, as if the earth itself celebrated its capacity for renewal. At the Double Horseshoe Ranch, Clara had initiated transformations that went beyond physical reconstruction. With the help of Zeke and Cole, now permanent employees, she had begun to implement new techniques of cattle management and water conservation. The additional lands revealed in her father's documents were being gradually incorporated, expanding the ranch until it became one of the most extensive in the region. But the most significant change was not visible in acres, nor countable in heads. Of cattle, it was the spirit of the place, the sense of openness and possibility that had replaced the stagnation and melancholy of previous years. On a particularly clear morning, Clara was on the porch, contemplating the horizon while knitting. It was a newly acquired skill, taught by Cole's wife, an Apache woman who had arrived at the ranch with her 2 small children. Clara, who had always considered her hands too large for delicate tasks, was now discovering the pleasure of creating complex patterns, of transforming yarn into something functional and beautiful. James emerged from the house, guided by the rhythmic sound of the needles. He had adapted to life on the ranch, with a naturalness that surprised everyone except Clara, who had come to understand that his true talent was not compensating for his blindness, but converting it into a different way of perceiving and inhabiting the world. "It sounds like you're progressing," he commented, sitting beside her on the bench they had built together, wide and strong to comfortably accommodate Clara's size. She smiled, observing the pattern that emerged between her fingers. "A design of interlaced leaves that recalled those of the old oak. Macawy says my hands were made for knitting," she responded. "That I can create more complex patterns because my fingers reach more points at once." James nodded, extending a hand to lightly touch the knitting, seeing through his fingers what Clara described. "I've always thought that limitations are just invitations to discover capacities we didn't know we had," he said. "What you consider your greatest weakness can become your most distinctive strength if you look at it from the right angle." Clara set the needles on her lap for a moment, contemplating her hands. She no longer wore the gloves constantly. She reserved them for hard work. She had learned to accept her hands as they were, strong but also capable of delicacy, large but precise, distinctive but not defective. "I received a letter from Meredith this morning," she commented, changing the subject. The cantina will be ready for the reopening next Saturday. She wants us to be guests of honor." James smiled, that gesture that transformed his weathered face and that Clara had come to treasure. "Shall we go then?" Clara nodded, then remembered to verbalize her response. "Yes, I think it's time to show Dry Creek what we've built here." She wasn't referring just to the renewed ranch, but to what existed between them. A relationship that had slowly blossomed, nurtured by mutual respect and shared discovery. They hadn't put a name to this bond, not officially, but each day they strengthened it with small acts of trust and vulnerability. Her mother's ring remained stored in her father's box, not for lack of feelings, but by a tacit agreement that some things deserved their own time to mature. Like the old oak, their connection was putting down deep roots before extending its branches toward the sky. "What are you thinking?" James asked after a moment of silence, perceiving the change in her breathing that always accompanied her deeper reflections. Clara contemplated the question, marveling at how this man could read her mood through signals that others would never notice. "I was thinking about trees," she responded honestly. "About how they communicate under the ground through their roots, how they share resources, warn each other of dangers, support each other. All invisible to us, but vital to them." James tilted his head, considering the metaphor. "Like us," he said softly. "What exists between us is not always expressed in words, but it's real. As real as those intertwined roots." Clara set her knitting aside and took James's hand in hers. It was a gesture that had become natural between them, a physical bridge that complemented the invisible connection they had cultivated. "Saturday," she said suddenly, with a decision that surprised even herself. "Saturday, at the reopening, I want everyone to know what you mean to me, what we are together." It wasn't a formal proposal, but both understood the importance of the declaration. In a small town like Dry Creek, presenting themselves together publicly, openly acknowledging their relationship, was a significant step. James brought Clara's hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with reverence. "It will be an honor to walk by your side, Clara Dawson," he responded simply. "As it has been an honor all these months, learning the silent language we speak together." The sun rose in the sky, bathing the porch in a golden light that promised a warm day. In the distance, in the corrals, Zeke directed the cowboys in the breaking of young colts. Near the house, Makawi taught her children and other children of the ranch to identify medicinal plants. The double horseshoe pulsed with renewed vitality, like a heart that finally beat at its natural rhythm. Clara picked up her knitting, her fingers finding the pattern again where she had left it. As she worked, she reflected on how her life had intertwined with that of James, with that of the ranch, with that of the entire community, forming a design more complex and beautiful than she would ever have imagined. "My father used to say that the double horseshoe was not just land and cattle," she commented, her needles moving with growing confidence. "He said it was a state of mind, a way of seeing the world. A place where difference is not feared but celebrated," he added, "where strength is not just physical, but also of spirit." "Exactly," Clara confirmed, a smile in her voice. "And I want everyone in Dry Creek to understand that too, not as a challenge but as an invitation." The day advanced around them, full of the ordinary sounds that formed their extraordinary shared life. The creaking of the wood under the sun, the distant lowing of cattle, the singing of birds that James could identify without hesitation, the whisper of the wind among the leaves of the old oak that had witnessed generations of Dawsons, and now witnessed the birth of something new. Clara continued knitting, her large, strong hands creating something delicate and lasting, a perfect metaphor for the life she was building step by step, stitch by stitch, day by day. Saturday dawned clear and promising, as if the sky itself participated in the celebration that Dry Creek was preparing. The reopening of Meredith's Cantina was not just the reopening of a business, it represented the resilience of an entire town that had faced destruction and chosen to be reborn stronger. Clara was in front of the mirror in her room, observing her reflection with a mixture of nervousness and determination. She wore a new dress made by Makawi with fabrics brought especially from the city. It did not try to disguise her height or her constitution. On the contrary, The design celebrated her unique proportions with an elegance that Clara had never considered possible for someone like her. In her hair, normally gathered in a practical braid, Cowboy had interwoven small wildflowers that grew on the slopes of the ranch. The effect was surprisingly delicate, a contrast with her imposing presence that, instead of seeming contradictory, created an unexpected harmony. A soft knock on the door interrupted her contemplation. "Come in," she responded, turning to find Zeke on the threshold, his normally stoic expression transformed by a genuine smile. "James sent me to ask if you're ready," the cowboy explained. "Although, if you allow me to say it, I think the answer is evident." Clara felt a warmth rise to her cheeks. Compliments were still unexplored territory for her, but she was learning to receive them as the gifts they were, instead of questioning or rejecting them. "Thank you, Zeke," she responded simply. "Tell him I'll be down in a moment." When the cowboy withdrew, Clara opened the drawer of her dresser and extracted the small box that contained her mother's ring. She contemplated it for an instant, its blue stone catching the morning light, before sliding it into the hidden pocket that Cowboy had incorporated into the design of the dress. She had not specifically planned to use the ring today, but something inside told her she should carry it with her, not as an expectation, but as a possibility, a seed that could germinate when the moment was right. On the porch, James waited with Zeke and Cole. The three men wore their best clothes, but it was James who immediately caught Clara's attention. There was something different about him, a serenity mixed with anticipation that gave him an almost luminous aura. Upon hearing her steps on the stairs, James turned his face toward her, and a slow smile transformed his features. "I can smell the flowers in your hair," he said by way of greeting, "and your step is different, lighter, almost musical." Clara stopped in front of him, marveling as always at his ability to see her in ways that no one else could. "It's a special day," she responded. "I feel different." James extended his hand, finding hers with that precision that never ceased to surprise her. "Beautiful," he said with conviction. "That's what I feel when you're near, a beauty that goes beyond what any eye could capture." The journey to Dry Creek passed in an atmosphere of joyful anticipation. Cole drove the carriage they had restored for special occasions, while Zeke rode alongside them as an honorary escort. James and Clara shared the back seat, their hands intertwined between them, communicating without words in that silent language they had perfected. As they approached the town, they could appreciate the transformation that had occurred in the months after the fire. The streets, once dusty and neglected, now showed young trees planted at regular intervals. The reconstructed buildings combined the practical functionality of the Old West with decorative touches that revealed a new community pride. Meredith's cantina, located in the heart of the town, stood out as a symbol of this renewal. Larger than its predecessor, with a spacious porch and windows that allowed the generous passage of light, the building was both a tribute to the past and a declaration of faith in the future. A small crowd had already gathered for the celebration. Clara felt a moment of apprehension upon seeing so many faces turned toward her, an echo of old fears that would never completely disappear. But then she noticed something different in the gazes. Respect, warmth, even admiration. She was no longer the strange curiosity of the town, but Clara Dawson of the Double Horseshoe, a woman whose uniqueness had helped save the community. Meredith emerged from the cantina, her face lighting up upon seeing them arrive. She approached with open arms, embracing Clara with genuine affection. "Look at you," she said, stepping back to admire her appearance. "I always knew there was a queen hidden under those work overalls." Clara smiled, accepting the compliment with a newly discovered grace. "And you," she responded, pointing to the reconstructed cantina. "I always knew nothing could keep you defeated for long." Meredith took Clara's hands in hers, a maternal gesture that always comforted her. "Come," she said, gently pulling. "There's something I want to show you before the official celebration begins." Clara looked at James, who nodded with an enigmatic smile as if sharing a secret with Meredith. "Go," he encouraged her. "I'll wait for you here." Intrigued, Clara followed Meredith into the interior of the cantina. The space was spacious and welcoming, with polished oak tables and an impressive bar that ran along an entire wall. But what immediately caught Clara's attention was a large painting that occupied a prominent place above the fireplace. It was a portrait of her father, Harlan Dawson, depicted as Clara remembered him, strong, dignified, with that gaze that combined determination and kindness. The artist had perfectly captured his essence, creating not just a portrait but a tribute. "The town council voted unanimously," explained Meredith. "They wanted to honor your father for what he truly was, a man of principles who tried to protect the entire community from Crow's greed." Clara felt her throat close with emotion, momentarily unable to form words. "And there's more," continued Meredith, guiding her toward a bronze plaque installed next to the portrait. The plaque bore a simple but powerful inscription: "In memory of Harlan Dawson, who taught us that true strength resides in protecting others," and in honor of his daughter, Clara May Dawson, who demonstrated that sometimes we need to be exactly who we are to save what we love. The tears that Clara had contained finally found release, rolling freely down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of a deep joy mixed with the understanding that her father had never really been forgotten and that she herself had never really been invisible. She had just been waiting for the right moment to be seen. "It's perfect," she finally managed to say. "He would be so proud of what everyone has built here." Meredith gave her a handkerchief to dry her tears. "That's not all," she added with a conspiratorial smile. "There's someone else who wants to show you something. Go to the back porch." Confused but intrigued, Clara followed the directions. The back porch of the cantina opened onto a small, newly planted garden, where desert flowers and aromatic herbs created an unexpected oasis. In the center, under an arbor that promised future shade when the vines grew, she found James waiting. There was something in his posture, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, that made Clara's heart skip a beat. "How did you get here?" "Before me?" she asked, genuinely surprised. James smiled, that smile that illuminated his entire face. "I know some shortcuts," he responded enigmatically. "Advantages of hearing what others don't." He took a step toward her, his hand finding hers with that precision that always amazed her. "Clara May Dawson," he began, his voice acquiring a solemn but intimate quality. "From the moment I entered that saloon and asked for you, my life changed. In ways I never imagined possible." Clara held her breath, feeling that the world around her was fading, leaving only this moment, this man, this connection that had blossomed between them like wildflowers after the rain. "I came to Dry Creek to fulfill a promise made to your father," James continued. "But I will stay if you allow me for a promise I want to make to you." From his pocket, he extracted an object that Clara immediately recognized, a small brass compass, twin to the one he had given her months ago. But this one had a modification. Instead of the original wind rose, the lid had been re-engraved with a design that intertwined two horseshoes, the symbol of the double horseshoe. "My father gave me a compass to find my way in the darkness," explained James. "I gave you mine because you became my true north, and now I have modified this one to represent what we have found together, a home, a shared purpose, a future we build day by day." He opened the compass, revealing that the interior had also been altered. Where the magnetic needle would normally be, there was now a small circular compartment, and in that space, perfectly fitted, rested a silver ring of braided design with a small jade green stone in the center. "The blue of the sky and the green of the earth," he said softly. "Complementary, like us." Clara felt her heart expanding in her chest, threatening to overflow the limits of her being. Without words, she extracted from the pocket of her dress her mother's ring, holding it next to the one James offered. "My mother and your father," she murmured, "guiding us even now." James nodded, his clear eyes bright with emotion, though they couldn't see the gesture Clara had made. "Clara Dawson," he said, his voice firm despite the contained emotion. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of sharing your life with me, not as someone who needs protection or direction, but as a partner, in every sense of the word, two complete beings who choose to walk together, learning from each other, growing together like those trees whose roots intertwine beneath the ground." Clara took James's hand between hers, feeling how they fit together perfectly despite their differences. or perhaps precisely because of them. "Yes," she responded simply, her voice clear and decided. "Yes, James McGraw, I will share my life with you. In this ranch, in this town, in any place where our shared path leads us." With hands that no longer trembled, she slid her mother's ring onto James's finger, while he did the same with the new ring on hers. They were not conventional gestures, as their relationship was not conventional, but they perfectly reflected the essence of what they had built, a bond based not on social expectations, but on mutual recognition of their true selves. The sound of applause surprised them both. Upon turning, Clara discovered that Meredith, Zeke, Cole, Macawi, and apparently half the town had silently gathered to witness the moment. Far from feeling exposed, as would have happened in the past, Clara experienced a wave of gratitude for this community that now celebrated them. James, perceiving the change in the atmosphere, smiled. "It seems we have an audience," he commented. "It's all right," Clara responded, intertwining her fingers with his. "I'm no longer afraid of being seen." Together, they walked toward the waiting crowd, each step marking not an end, but a new beginning. And as they advanced under the spring sun, Clara thought of the old oak on the ranch, how it had witnessed generations of Dawsons live, love, and persevere. Now it would witness a new story, one that intertwined past and future in a present full of possibilities. In her pocket, the two compasses rested together, pointing toward the same north, not a fixed destination, but the constant promise of a shared path, illuminated by a light that only they could see.